there's also these current horror films that the post-horror tag is affixed to, like A Quiet Place.
Right.
Now, did you see A Quiet Place 1 and 2?
No, I saw like probably about that first 15 minutes of A Quiet Place. And I don't know. I mean, maybe because I was sitting with my girlfriend. I don't know, but it just didn't grab me. It
Didn't
was
grab
something
you.
else.
Okay. I enjoyed them both as monster movies. Now, on the one hand, I've got a very good friend, a paleontologist, Dr. Michael Ryan. And Michael and I both love monster movies, but Michael just found the premise of A Quiet Place too stupid to pay attention to, right? So if you make any sound at all, these extraterrestrial insects hear the sound and they come and kill you and eat you, right? That's the whole premise of A Quiet Place.
Right.
Now, in A Quiet Place, they end up at this farm, right? Our straggling survivors who are having to be real quiet end up at this farm. And as they get to the ridge of the hill, you see this huge cornfield. And it's like, oh, cool, a farm. But, I'm an old New Englander. And it's like, well, it's really noisy work to plant corn and to be a farmer. Like, there's no fucking quiet way to like have a cornfield, right? So right off the bat, I'm like, that doesn't quite jive with the premise. Like,
Yeah, technical issues can ruin stuff for me, especially if you're like,
well, it goes even further, right? My wife uses hearing aids. One of the characters in A Quiet Place 1 and 2 is deaf, and her hearing aids are very central to the narrative of both films. Now, this is post-apocalyptic times, Dan, right? People have to like go out at night to try to find food, break into abandoned stores and see if there's any food left or anything. And they're all using flashlights, so they have to go out and steal batteries, because without batteries you can't use your flashlight, right? And they can't run a generator because a generator makes noise and the bugs will hear it and kill you. Well, as I'm watching both movies, I'm like, wait a minute, my wife has to put batteries in her hearing aid, or she has to recharge her hearing aid like every night. So how is this character's hearing aids even working any longer? And it didn't ruin the movies for me, but it also completely made the ending of A Quiet Place 2 completely fucking bullshit silly, because it's just like, well, okay, that's stupid. It's one of the things I look for in horror fiction and horror comics is where are the blind spots. There was that whole wave of ghost movies we just went through, with The Conjuring being the big license,
right.
franchise in them. But they kept doing really stupid stuff. Like, my dad had a heating oil company for part of my childhood. So I used to have to go out on the trucks where we would deliver the heating oil. And you'd have to service people's furnaces, right? And usually that meant like you're in a crawl space, in some of the older New England houses, like these real cobwebby, dirty crawl spaces. Or best case scenario, they have an actual basement with a poured cement floor, and it's not so hard to get to the furnace. Well, there were a couple of these recent ghost movies where like the mystery of the ghost is behind this wall in the basement that's sealed up, that nobody knew there was a room back there. When they bust the wall down, the furnace is in there. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, if the furnace is in there, how did you service the furnace for the last 40 fucking years, right? There was another one of them that had a gathering of children in the attic. It might have been one of the two Sinister movies. There were those two movies, Sinister, right, that came out. And it might have been one of those. It might not have been. No, it was a Ouija board movie. It was one of the Ouija board movies that came out over the last 5 years. And the kids go up in the attic to play with the Ouija board. Well, there's a wood stove in the attic, like a functioning wood stove with the pipe going out the roof. And I'm like, who would put a fucking wood stove in the attic? Like, I used to heat with wood. You try to get the wood stove in the main center of the house,
right,
or in the basement so that the heat rises, right? Nobody puts a working wood stove in a.
I lived in PA when they have blackouts all the time. You have the wood stove right in the middle of the house.
Yeah. And like right off, I know, oh, these people are from California and they have no fucking idea what a wood stove is or what it does. And no surprise, mainly it's California filmmakers behind the ghost movies that have the the hidden room with the furnace in it. It's like, well, they don't even know what a heating unit is, you know. So
I saw a Punisher comic where he fires a gun, and like my dad is he's big on firearms. He has an FFL, you know, that's his whole hobby, you know. But he fires a gun, and you see the bullet with the cartridge still attached, flying through the air. Which anybody who knows anything about firearms knows that that didn't happen.
Yeah, the cartridge is back in the, or being ejected way back there, right? Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Although I have to admit, again, going back to our Swamp Thing years, Dan, Alan Moore wrote a script about a female werewolf that was based on a idea I had sent to Alan about, wow, why don't we do a werewolf story where the woman's menstruation cycle is tied in with lycanthropy?
Right.
Alan
I remember that
that's
story.
A great
yeah.
idea. Well, I get the script. Now, my dad had a heating oil company when I was very young, up until, let's see, Eagle Oil. I think until I was like 10 or 11. And then we had a grocery store called Bissette's Market. And we didn't have a chain of them, but over like a 10-year period, our first store was in Duxbury. Then we closed that. Our second store was a little store in Waterbury. And then we moved to Colbyville, which is part of Waterbury. And we had the biggest Bissette's Market that we had. And that was our last Bissette's Market. Why am I telling all this shit? So I get the script from Alan, and he describes a display in a supermarket for silver knives that they've got on sale. But he indicates that the blades have to be pointing out, because this is how he's going to have the female werewolf die at the end. She leaps onto the blades. Now, as a grocer's son, A, you're not going to have a dangerous knife display in your retail space because you're liable if somebody gets hurt. B, if you are going to have a knife display in your store, you're not going to set up a display with all the blades facing out, because you're asking for someone to trip and hurt themselves. But that's what the script said. And, you know, the story wasn't going to work unless that was in there. So, like, I had to find a way to make that look believable. And that was a case of me being like the artist. If I'd gotten a job to do a comic of A Quiet Place, where I'd have to go, well, this is really fucking stupid in a couple of ways I can't ignore.
It all ties back, yeah.
I gotta tell the story as best I can. And, you know, I'm the artist, I'm not the writer. It's not my job to say, hey, you got to change this script. Now, that said, there were points when we were working on Swamp Thing where I would call Alan on something. Early in our run, Alan had just mailed John and I a letter. We were in the middle of the Jason Woodrue Floronic Man, our first story arc that we did with Alan. And Alan says, yeah, I'm going to wind it up. And what the Floronic Man is doing is he's having all the oxygen, all the plants pump out carbon dioxide to kill off the human species so the plants can take over the earth. And I immediately wrote back to Alan and said, Alan, whoa. Plants inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen. Like, your story makes no sense. Okay? Like, it's the reverse of what you described in the letter. That's not how it works. Plants actually provide the oxygen that we need to live as a species. And Alan wrote back saying, wow, Steve, I'm really glad you caught that. You have to remember, Alan wrote something along the lines of, you have to remember, I never made it out of high school. Like, he left school before. So there would be these blind spots in Alan's education that, you know, most of us would take for granted, because if you had basic, you know, science and basic biology and the basics of botany during your school career, you would have known that. And those were blind spots for, you know, Alan, who's this amazingly sophisticated, well-read genius, you know, one of the 2 or 3 geniuses I've ever met in my lifetime. But still, he'd have those little blind spots. And that was a case where I went, you know, I may only be the artist, but I cannot let this fly. I have to speak up now. And because I said it early,
logic,
Alan fixed it. So none of that saw print. But, you know, the stupid knife display in our werewolf story is right there for all to see. And so I'm guilty as well of stupid tropes in horror fiction. Guilty as charged. So.
one thing that I had a big question about is like I know that you would submit stuff and sometimes Taliban would completely redraw something. Did you guys have fights over or
Oh
disagreements
no,
over
no, no,
that?
no, no, no. We never had fights over it. God, John and I have never had a fight over anything that I can remember. I guess we're not a married couple. Um, uh,
I was married, so I understand.
yeah, no, no. John and I never fought over anything. If John ever made a change or redrew something, it was always for the better in my mind.
Okay.
The major issue that John redrew, radically redrew, was the issue before my first issue with Alan Moore. Our deadlines were so fucked up on Swamp Thing by the time Marty Pasco left the book that I was penciling the end of Swamp Thing 19 at the same time I was beginning to pencil Swamp Thing 21. And Len Wein had Dan Day, brother of Gene Day. Dan Day is an artist who did a lot of work for DC and a lot of independent publications. Dan Day did the penciling on Swamp Thing, Saga of the Swamp Thing number 20, which was Alan Moore's first actual issue. He
Okay.
scripted number 20. Number 21, the anatomy lesson, is the one that Alan, John, myself, and Rick Beach first collaborated on. John almost completely redrew Dan Day's pencils. I am not exaggerating at all. And he did that not because he was being a prick or anything. It's because Dan Day had never drawn Swamp Thing, right? He was a pitch hit artist, and it was a character he didn't know. And Dan Day made the deadline and got the pages in on time, but they were really rushed and they were really crude. And Swamp Thing didn't look like Swamp Thing. So John, being John, as he always did, gave it 200%. John never gave 100% to an issue. John gave 200% to every issue he did, and he radically changed it. If you're interested, Dan, I still have the blog post up at my old blog. I did a whole serialized essay, I think 3 or 4 parts, where I showed some of the scans of the Dan Day pencils and then a scan of the John Taliban final
Oh yeah, I'd love to
version.
see it. How do I see that?
And those are radical redrawings. Now, John never redrew anything I penciled to that extent. But anytime John, altered whatever I did, it was always for the better, and it always was great. Why would I fight with him when he was making me look good? Right? So,
how do I see that stuff? The stuff that he redrew that Dan Day originally drew?
You may have seen it on my blog, or it may be, you put something out there. I put this on a blog over 10 years ago, so it could have been cut and paste and other people shared it. I don't know. The most radical redrawing John did that you might have seen somewhere is when he and I were doing the 2-parter, the Nuke Face papers.
Mm-hmm.
We had this character that I based on one of our Kubert School classmates, my roommate for a time at Kubert School, Larry Olson Cole. And I drew Larry as this long-haired wino that Nuke Face meets in the woods. And Nuke Face was this character John Taliban created.
Right.
And it was totally original to John. And John threw it into the hopper when John and I would send plot suggestions first to Marty Pasco and then to Alan Moore once Alan was the writer.
No, I remember. Like I've reread the Swamp Things a bunch of times, probably too many times.
So you may have seen extensively redrawn panels of that hobo. Mm-hmm. The way I penciled him after he drank the toxic waste that Nuke Face offered him, he not only dies, but his body begins to like completely decompose and implode. Like overnight, like the effect of the toxic waste on his physical tissues is extreme. And I really went to town. Like the last close-up panel of that poor fucker I had penciled, like one eye was like this pucker hole, and there were no teeth left in his gums, right? They were just open gum holes, all the teeth had dropped out. And Karen Berger, our editor at the time, just said, you gotta tone this down. Like, this is too far. I think that's the only time John and I ever toned down something after we'd lost the code. So John redrew those 2 or 3 panels so that you could still recognize, our friend Larry Locke under there. Because I had really gone to
Going
town.
out.
The only other time he had to redraw, again, it was at an editor's instruction, was before Alan Moore was on the book. John and I, when we were working with editor Len Wein and with writer Marty Pasco, we redesigned Arcane and the End-Man. I was the one that had that design of Arcane being in like this spider-like exoskeleton that is his limbless body could set into, and that was like, and we were the ones that turned the End-Man into sort of these insect arachnid humanoids. And we had I had drawn, it was the opposite of what Karen Berger made us do. I had drawn on this double page splash in Saga of the Swamp Thing 29 these caterpillar women who were spinning a web around one of Marty Pasco's characters, cocooning him. And I gave them like women's eyes. Like they had these caterpillar bodies and these faces like a silkworm, right? Like a spinneret that they're shooting the silk out of their mouth, like Mothra in the Godzilla movies. But they have these really beautiful women's eyes with long eyelashes and everything. And it creeped Len Wein out. And he instructed John, could you get rid of those eyes? And so what John did, typical John, is he turned them into like breasts. They look like breasts with little mole eyes where the nipples would have been. And that was okay. Like I found that hilarious. Like, so my women's eyes aren't okay, but tit eyes are okay. So, those are the only 2 times I can remember John really radically changing something. And both times it was, at the instruction of the editors saying, hey, Steve's pencils can't stand, fix this. So.
Well, I really like I love John's work, and he's one of my favorite artists. Period, a huge inspiration for me. But I really feel like the combo of you and him had like the most energy I've ever seen. Especially like those fairly early Swamp Things that you did with Alan Moore, where it's like it's almost bursting off the page. Like I said, when I was a little kid and I saw those, I was like, I've never seen anything like this. It's like grasped me like nothing else.
Well, for me, it's all about energy. I mean, everything I draw is about the energy. Part of why I don't have the ability to draw like John Totleben is I don't have the patience for it. And I don't have the patience for it because for me, the act of drawing is the act of channeling energy, as much raw energy as I can onto the page. I don't know if you ever read my dinosaur comic, Tyrant.
Yes.
that was the hardest work I ever put in to try to slow myself down. But even then, I would slow myself down in order to try to get more primal energy on the page, right?
Okay.
And I would pace myself so that when the action went apeshit, I would go back to those slashing lines. And the 3 cartoonists I mentioned earlier, Sam Glanzman, Joe Kubert, Greg Irons, their brushwork was all about high energy brushwork. I when I was a kid, I had never seen a comic page that looked and felt as real to me as a page by Sam Glanzman. As I got older, once I was a preteen, I never saw an artist working in American comic books who put as much life and energy into a drawing, a panel, a page as Joe Kubert. And once I was a teenager and I was reading underground comics for the first time, it was really Greg Irons' work that I couldn't get enough of. Like Greg also had that same kind of brushstroke that Sam Glanzman and Joe Kubert have, but in Greg Irons' work, it was about me, right? It was like when Greg Irons drew something with his brush, it looked like like this raw energy expressed through meat, like flesh. There's other cartoonists who also have like super energetic lines whose work I love, like Jack Davis, right? Jack Davis is was an amazing cartoonist, one of the best cartoonists ever of the 20th century. And I responded to the energy of his line, but I didn't seek to imitate it. Sam Glanzman with his Kona Monarch of Monster Isle, the Dell comic I read when I was a kid. I tried to imitate the way Sam drew because that's his animals looked alive to me, more alive than any other animal in any comic book I'd read. Um, and Joe Kubert, again, I fell in love with Joe's work, and not just Sergeant Rock, but even more so Enemy Ace, Firehair. I still have the comic books of Tarzan, the original.
Was that part of what promoted you to go to school?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd have gone to the school maybe anyway, but once I saw Joe Kubert at a school, yeah, I had to go there. This guy was one of my heroes, and to meet Joe, to get to work under Joe, to get to study under Joe, to get Joe becoming my mentor. Oh my God, I still can't believe it happened, but it did. And yeah, it was all about that energy that you're responding to as a reader, Dan, and as a as somebody looking at my art. Right now I'm working on a new project, and I'm working on it's going to be a long-term project, like 2 or 3 years, and I'm doing it with my artist friend John Jennings.
Okay.
And we're collaborating with an amazing writer, novelist, short story author, fantasist named Nalo Hopkinson. And John is the one who came to me. He wanted to work with me, and we ended up collaborating on a couple of things. In fact, let me grab it again. This cover for one of my monster sketchbooks, Brooding Creatures.
Okay.
This is my sketch, and John Jennings did the digital inks and color over it.
Okay.
And John and I began kind of jamming together on stuff.
All that stuff is on Amazon.
Yeah. Brooding Creatures and Thoughtful Creatures are available on Amazon. And again, sorry to put my huckster hat on. It's print on demand. And if you go looking for those two sketchbooks, Thoughtful Creatures by S.R. Bissette, Brooding Creatures by S.R. Bissette, they're available in 3 formats. There's a black and white inexpensive edition in paperback. That's the lowest priced one. There's a black and white and color edition in paperback, which is medium priced. And if you're someone who can afford it, there's like a $30 hardcover black and white and color edition. Okay. So with my sketchbooks, I'm always going to put them out in these multiple formats. I want them affordable because a lot of people can't afford these expensive books that are out there these days, and I totally get that. But I want my work to be accessible to people. But I also, I love seeing the work in color, and color is expensive to do with print on demand. So going the extra step to the color edition is there as well. But anyway, back to my point. So John Jennings and I began to jam with my doing like pencils, and John John Jennings doing the finishes with digital, because he works all digital. I don't work digital, right? I still work on pencil, paper, brush, ink on paper. I'll scan it. I've got enough rudimentary computer skills to be able to scan my work and prepare it for somebody to work with. Then I send that to John Jennings. Well, we're going to do a whole graphic novel this way.
That's awesome.
Nalo Hopkinson is writing it. It's like a crime. It's sort of a horror noir graphic novel, a crime horror graphic novel set in 1952.
Okay, and, what's the title of that?
It's going to be called Night Comes Walking.
Okay. And it'll be available on Amazon for people to buy?
Oh, it'll be everywhere. We're doing it for Abrams Books. We contracted with Abrams Books. So it'll be in bookstores and so on. But it's going to be a few. I mean, this is
there aren't too many bookstores left, but
yeah, I agree. There's only like one, in driving distance of my home left. I was not joking with somebody that I was in an argument with, and I said, it's easier for me to get in my car and drive to buy magazines of munitions for firearms than it is for me to find a magazine right now, a paper magazine right now. There's almost none of them around. So anyway, Night Comes Walking. It'll be from Abrams Books. The author is Nalo Hopkinson, and the artists are yours truly and John Jennings. And knock on wood, that'll be out like 2024, 2025. I know that sounds way down the line, but we've got at least 2 years of work ahead of us. It's going to be over 200 pages, and it's a pretty extensive work. This will probably be my last graphic novel. I've only done a couple, graphic novels, really. And work like Swamp Thing, that was not done as a graphic novel. You know, that was a monthly paycheck. That was a periodical. So
Yeah, I noticed a number. Like I got, I think it's Barry Windsor Smith's
oh,
Monsters.
Monster. Oh my
Yeah,
God. What an incredible book. Just incredible book. It's really weird to me that you know, within a year we had these two graphic novels that seemed to come out of nowhere. Barry Windsor Smith Monsters. And you know, Barry worked on that thing for 30 fucking years, you know. Um, if you haven't seen it, there's a an issue of Comic Book Creator, which is John Morrow's I'm sorry, John B. Cook's magazine, published by Two Morrows. There's a whole issue dedicated to Barry Windsor Smith Monsters, and John Cook painstakingly lays out the history of what led to that work being created. And within the same year, we had that book that did come out of nowhere called My Favorite Thing is Monsters. And wow, I mean, those two books for me were like vindication. It's like, wow, two giant graphic novels that like prove why monsters are important and great. You know, it's like, that's an argument I don't have to have ever again in my life, I guess. So
I think there's a lot of like there's a lot of deeper layers to all that stuff. Like if you read the original Frankenstein, you know, it's like
oh yeah.
Dr. Frankenstein's creation is actually, I think, the hero. You know, he's just like abused and misunderstood by society and so on. But there's a lot about how people react to things different. Not to go
Yeah.
off on a tangent.
No, that's not a tangent. And let's not forget that novel was written by a teenage girl.
Right.
You know, Mary Shelley wasn't even 20 yet when Frankenstein was published under a pen name. She didn't have her name on the original printing of the book.
Wasn't it like there was kind of like a boys' club and they let her get in there, but they didn't really expect anything and she just fucked them all?
Yeah, how is that different from Bloomhouse right now? You know, Bloomhouse claimed in some press release I read, you know, that they were trying to find women directors, but they just couldn't find these women horror filmmakers. And fuck, the most fucked up shit I've seen over the last 5 years is just horror movies by women. It's like, oh my God, it's like incredible the stuff that's available right now. Yeah, and in terms of graphic novels, I mean, we're in a real golden age of you know, original work, including work that falls into this, you know, this other subgenre that's popular right now that people like to call folk horror, of incredible comics and graphic novels written and drawn by women. It's like, you know, let's drop this gender bullshit once and for all. And let's not forget, Mary Shelley is
as long
like
as a good story and good art, who cares who makes
well, and Mary Shelley's like the godmother of the genre right there. And it's like, come on, nobody's talking much about Varney the vampire. No, it's Mary Shelley Frankenstein. And like you say, it's this incredibly multi-layered, deep work.
Right.
And yeah, the hell with the boys club. You know, I was teaching at the Center for Cartoon Studies for 15 years. And during that period of time, we opened our doors in 2005. And during that period of time, I watched and experienced as our class group each year morphed from, you know, 2/3 guys, 1/3 women, to half and half, to, you know, a majority of many of the classes now are women, and they are doing incredible work. And also, I mean, despite the phobia of our times and some of the political swing of our times, you know, every single year we had one or more transgender students, and they are just doing phenomenal work. I don't give a shit about, you know, the gender fixations of the culture at large and some of the factions that are looking to take over things right now. As you know, as somebody that loves creators and loves creative work, we're in a real golden age. And part of the reason for that golden age is these old walls, you know, finally being knocked down.
Right.
And I hope they stay knocked down, because, you know, any attempt to reinstate the patriarchy in my mind is just, you know, more regressionist bullshit.
Right.
So,
Well, like I said, it really should be who does the best work. It's not, you know, you shouldn't look at who made it. You should look at the product.
right. I also do not have to subscribe to the personal philosophy or belief system of the creator involved. You know, some of my favorite creators from what I know about their life, and I've read many biographies of Edgar Allan Poe, Sam Peckinpah. I just read a great biography on Warren Zevon. A lot of these people were alcoholic dicks and addicts. Like, I
Right.
don't care.
Who died in a gutter? Yeah.
I'm sorry for what they went through, what they put people through in their circle. I'm not minimizing that, but I cannot put on a piece of music and worry about whether every musician involved in this recording would politically align with my worldview.
Right. Yeah.
That is a horrible way to look at the world. I cannot pick up a comic or a graphic novel and go, wow, I really love this piece of work. I wonder if this person shares my personal belief system, religion, philosophy. Fuck that bullshit. It's like,
I agree 100%. Yeah.
In fact, a lot of the work that is very near and dear to me, there are aspects to a lot of those works that are antithetical to who I am, the way I try to live, the way I try to treat people. But that doesn't mean the work doesn't impact me, doesn't mean something to me. Particularly as a horror junkie, I'm drawn to the most extreme shit out there, Dan, and I suspect you are too. But that does not mean I share that worldview. In a lot of cases, I'm drawn to the most extreme shit because it's the stuff I hope I never experience any aspect of in my day-to-day life. That's kind of the use of horror sometimes to me. Is like, okay, what's the worst case scenario? Let me experience that vicariously. And I have to say, I mean, you and I started the conversation by talking about personal tragedies that, really shape who we are and what we do and why we try to do what we do. That doesn't mean we're addicted to tragedy. That, we're human beings. We try to avoid terrible shit happening to us, to our loved ones. But when it does happen, I can honestly say that some of the rough times I've been through, having grown up reading fantasy, science fiction, horror, watching these movies, listening to this music, helped me get through some of that shit, because it sort of became an anchor, or it sort of became, well, bad as it is to me right now, it's not as bad as that.
Right.
Right?
No, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And so, every time that they try and correct them, they go violent video games, violent movies, violent. The people who actually look at that stuff and read that stuff or listen to that stuff, they don't actually do the crimes, in that work. It's like they read it and like they're horrified by it or they're affected by it, but they go, I will definitely not do that.
Right now I recently discovered a British horror writer whose work I'd had in my library, but I never put together. It was the same guy. It's a writer named Charles Birkin, Birkin. This guy has a nasty fucking imagination, and I'm finally pulled together. Wow, I've got like almost all his short story collections and I'm rereading them. And it's I'd read them before, but I'd read them like, 1975. I read another one in 1986. I never put together the voice of this guy. And he is, I'm rereading all the work that I own of his. And it's one of the nastiest horror writers I have ever revisited in my life. But it's amazing to me that, like, the dedication of one of the books is to his wife. And he says, I forget her name, but to so-and-so who really has no tolerance for nastiness. And it's like, yeah, I haven't been for years, but I used to go to NECON every year, which is this gathering of horror writers in Rhode Island every summer. And I was very fortunate to be invited into that community. And I went for about 10 years, I guess, off and on. And I miss it, but we're in a pandemic. I don't do conventions. I don't go to anything public right now. And
we just got over COVID, right?
Yeah. I just got over COVID day before yesterday, as a matter of fact. And but I have to say, I used to go every year because that was the sweetest bunch of people I ever got to hang out with, and they are all into horror, right? They're all horror writers and horror novelists, short story authors, artists, and I loved going every year because it was like, it was like finding my tribe and really sweet, kind, caring people. And I've stayed in touch with many of them thanks to social media, and just really lovely people. And we all write fucked up shit. Like, for us, writing and drawing, part of the function is to get that dark stuff out of our system and down on the page. And also, horror's fun. I'm talking about the medicinal effects of horror, but I also am into it because it's fun for me.
Makes it a lot more complex often. It adds like a different tone to it. You take stuff more dramatically, more
Well,
seriously.
on the one hand, but on the other hand, both of us have seen, read, listened to really awful horror shit. That could be
Right.
a lot of fucking fun. It's like I would much rather sit through a bad horror movie than a bad romantic comedy.
True. Yeah.
I mean, and I've watched enough romantic comedies in my life and please forgive me, romantic comedy fans out there. I
Even
get
a
the formula.
mediocre romantic
I
comedy.
get the formula, even the good ones. The formula is two people who should be together can't be together, and the whole narrative becomes how long can we keep them apart before we bring them back together for the feel good ending, or how do we keep them apart forever so they'll never meet again for the bummer ending? Like that's it, right? That's the genre of romance in a nutshell. Those are the two things. I would rather sit through the creakiest, stupidest George Zucco monogram 1940 piece of shit horror movie because it's funnier to me. It's more enjoyable to me. It's weirder to me than sitting through any Sandra Bullock, David Duchovny bullshit. So, and I shouldn't say David Duchovny because he's actually been involved with a lot of stuff I really love between
Right.
X-Files and Californication and so on. So
Sandra Bullock's been in a couple movies I like.
yeah, but I'm picking on them because there was this one movie, the two of them that were in, that every time my wife and I took this, that we sometimes when we used to travel, we'd take a Dartmouth coach it would travel from where we live in New England down to Boston or New York, and you could get to the airport without having to drive and park your car. And they show a movie, and 8 times out of 10, it was the same fucking movie, and it was the one with Sandra Bullock and David Duchovny, romantic comedy. So for me, that movie's like branded into my gray matter. It's like, okay, that's what a romantic comedy is.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep you here all day, so I'm gonna wrap this up. But what are you working on right now, and how can people get a hold of you?
I'm on Facebook all the time. I know that's the old people social platform, but I'm also on Twitter. But Facebook is the only one that's really proven to be useful for me. And when I say useful, yeah, I'm a huckster. Facebook is where I've had better success selling artwork and books and stuff. And so you can find me on Facebook, and I am on Twitter. And I'm under my name, Stephen R. Bissette. I no longer blog, and I no longer have an online store. So if you're looking for my new work, most of it's available on Amazon. Yes, I know Amazon is the 800-pound evil gorilla in the room, but they're the largest distributor on planet Earth. And if I'm selling shit, it only makes sense to go to the largest distributor on planet Earth. Let's see, new work before we get off. I've got the new sketchbooks, which I mentioned earlier. Those again are titled Thoughtful Creatures, and the second one is called Brooding Creatures, and I'm working on 2 more right now. I've got new work out as a writer. I wrote a giant 700-page book, which came out about a year and a half or so ago on David Cronenberg's The Brood. Here, I'll hold up the book for you.
Which I've seen a number of times.
Yeah,
I'm a big
man,
Cronenberg fan too.
that's my favorite Cronenberg film. So it's called the Midnight Movie Monograph,
Okay.
The Brood by Stephen R. Bissette. Look at this. Very obsessive. And this is my most recent work of nonfiction. I also contributed to a brand new book on David Cronenberg, edited by Chris Kelso and David Leo Rice. I contributed an essay to Children of the New Flesh.
Okay.
And I contributed the essay about Cronenberg's first ever film, Transfer.
I don't think I've seen that. I thought I'd seen all of his stuff.
Well, Transfer was his first student film.
Okay.
So if you've got one of the there's Arrow Films has put out Blu-ray editions of some of Cronenberg's work, like Videodrome and so on. And
Okay.
sometimes in the bonus features they'll include his earlier film work, his pre-pro film work. And
Okay.
I wrote about Transfer. I also have a new work of fiction out that I collaborated on. It's a book called Studio of Screams, and I'm one of 5 writers on this book. And this is a love letter to people who love British horror movies. Um, I was invited. Well, I'll give you the short form, Dan. Stephen Volk, right, the last guy listed, he should be the first guy listed, had the idea of inventing a British horror film studio that never existed, and he called it Blythewood. And he mentioned to his good friend Mark Morris, who is also a horror novelist in the UK, this idea. And Mark said, "That's a great idea." And Stephen and Mark decided that they wanted to write a movie tie-in novelization of movies that never existed. Okay, so just like there were movie novelizations of Hammer films like Countess Dracula and Taste the Blood of Dracula and so on, they wrote fictional novelizations as if the stories had been movies made by Blythewood Studios. And while they were doing that, they invited their novelist friend Tim Leben and Christopher Golden to also write novelizations of made-up British horror films. And as they were working on the project, Chris Golden said, we're going to have to explain to the reader what this is, like, right, that these movies don't exist, but we want to make it as if they did exist in the 60s. I think my friend Steve Bissette could come up with, an opening chapter about Blythewood Studios. And much to my glee, Stephen Volk, Mark Morris, Tim Leben all said to Chris, "Yeah, that's a great idea." And they invited me in, and I asked them for the outlines of their novels. And when they sent them to me, I said, I could write an opening chapter, but what I'd rather do is write a wraparound that would go between your novelizations. And I wasn't doing it because I wanted to eat up pages and have a bigger part of the project. I did it because
it's kind of a Tales from the Crypt sort of.
You got it. You got it. I was going to refer to your hat, right? It was like Tales from the Crypt. I wanted to write something that would be like the wraparound story with Peter Cushing in it from those Amicus films, like Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, or From Beyond the Grave. And that's what I did. So I wrote the material that surrounds their novelizations, and in doing so, wrote a new horror story as well. My wraparound story is kind of the last little sting in the tail. Nice. So if you like horror fiction and you love British horror movies, Studio of Screams is for you. And it's published by PS Publications, but it's available on Amazon. They're a British publisher. I also, that's not all. I also have been doing commentary tracks and bonus features for Blu-rays that are out, Dan. So if you buy Blu-rays and you love horror and fantasy films, I've been doing commentary tracks for a number of films. I did commentary tracks over the last year for Ralph Bakshi's Fritz the Cat, the feature, the first X-rated animated cartoon. Commentary track for an old 1950s giant bug movie called Monster from Green Hell. And I also contributed commentary tracks to 2 Russian fantasy epics, one called Ilya Muromets, Ilya, and the second name Muromets. It was a movie I saw as a kid in America as The Sword and the Dragon. This is a release of the original Russian-Finnish version of the film. It's a magnificent heroic fantasy. And I also contributed a commentary track to another Russian fantasy called Sampo, Sampo, which most Americans are familiar with from Mystery Science Theater. It was released under the title The Day the Earth Froze, and Mystery Science Theater, ribbed the shit out of it when under that form. But again, the original widescreen color restored Russian version it's just a glorious fantasy film. And I also just contributed a commentary track to an Arrow film release that's coming out this fall of The Return of Count Yorga. And my friend Tim Lucas did the commentary track for the original Count Yorga Vampire. So I finally get to be on a Blu-ray release with my good friend Tim Lucas. He used to do Video Watchdog, and he wrote the book on Mario Bava, All the Colors of the Dark, and I've also been contributing commentary, not commentary tracks, but bonus features to some box sets. I contributed a whole presentation, a history of the producer Sam Katzman, to a box set that's called Cold War Creatures. Arrow Film put it out. It's 4 1950s horror science fiction films: The Giant Claw, Creature with the Atom Brain, The Zombies of Morotau, and The Werewolf. And The Werewolf is the best of those 4 movies. And I also contributed a bonus feature, 90-minute lecture to Weird Wisconsin. And it's a collection of films by one of my favorite American independent filmmakers. And so just look for Weird Wisconsin.
Where can you find this stuff? Like if you want on Amazon, you search
Yeah,
for it?
it's all on Amazon. Everything's on Amazon these days. I hate
Lord
to say it.
Bezos.
Yeah. So let's be good to Lord Bezos and hope he doesn't, blow that shit up. But yeah, all of that stuff's on Amazon, and you'll be seeing more of that kind of work from me. The work keeps coming in. I don't go looking for it, but I really enjoy doing it, and it's sort of an offshoot of my writing. And I should also mention I'm wrapping up a book right now. Cryptid Cinema was a book that I put out on Amazon about Bigfoot and lake monster movies. Cryptids are the Yeti, the Sasquatch, and so on. And the second book in that series, which is called Cryptid Cinema: The Boggy Creek Bequest, will be out later this year, and it's an entire book on the making of The Legend of Boggy Creek, the 1972 Bigfoot movie that really kicked it all off. That really started the whole.
Yeah, I love when people pick like iconic monsters. Like I did this story on Loch Ness with a Loch Ness monster and all that stuff. I'm a fan of that kind of stuff.
Oh, well, then Cryptid Cinema is right up your alley, Dan. Both books. The first book, Cryptid Cinema, which you can go buy right now on Amazon, I put it out at the end of 2017, and it's kind of a shotgun approach to it. It's write-ups of different, the far extremes of Cryptid Cinema. And with the second book, I'm really honing in on the one movie that really, pulled everything together, which was The Legend of Boggy Creek. And hopefully next year, my third Cryptid Cinema book will be out. And that really is the book I should have written first. It's a history of cryptid cinema, beginning in the silent era and coming right up to 1972, when The Legend of Boggy Creek, really made it a genre. So that's what I've been doing. And the big project, as you and I talked about a few minutes ago, is Night Comes Walking, which I'm doing with Nalo Hopkinson and John Jennings. And I feel really lucky to be part of this project. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And we'll post up everything you're working on. You're keeping very busy. It seems like you had the whole career, but now you're doing like as much now as you've ever done.
Yeah. I mean, when I retired from teaching in 2020, within about 4 months, my wife said, "You're busier now than you were when you were teaching." And I'm doing stuff I love. I'm lucky in that my wife and I have just survived COVID. A lot of people didn't, and it's not the same sort of grim outlook I had when I was a teenager and realized it was really life and death. Like, if I want to do comics, I got to get serious about it. Now I'm on the other end of my life, and whatever years I got left, I'm going to enjoy myself. And lucky for you, part of how I enjoy myself is writing, drawing, and doing all this crazy shit. I'm really enjoying getting to play with doing new work, like these commentary tracks for these Blu-ray editions. This is something I never thought I'd get to do in my lifetime. But Dan, you and I have lived long enough. I mean, we never thought all these crazy things we grew up with would be available in all these amazing new editions and shit.
Well, the whole social media, like I didn't have a computer growing up.
I
cell
felt
phones.
totally...
I didn't have a cell phone.
No, I didn't have any of that shit. A lot of it I'm glad I missed when I see what the kids now are having to deal with. But
they'll walk around with their cell phone.
Yeah, I'm not one of those people. But here I am sitting in my basement, talking to you, on this screen, and we get to converse, and you're going to do something with this. It's going to get out
Back
there.
in the day, yeah, this wouldn't happen.
This wouldn't happen. And in a weird way, you know, we all owe the pandemic for really refining this Zoom technology that everybody's using in different ways.
It's true. Actually, yeah, no, it's true.
So,
And it's a side effect. Not that I wanted the pandemic at all, but my latest novel is called The End of the World, and sales jumped way up right when the pandemic hit.
you know, I have to say, and I'm not being facetious in any way, I felt better equipped when the pandemic hit to kind of deal with the changes we were going through, because I've been reading all these end of the world novels since I was like 6, you know, and I was like, oh, okay, you know, how bad
like Lucifer's Hammer. Did you read that?
Oh yeah, Lucifer's Hammer, and you know, and I also grew up with the really bleak ones were the British ones, like No Blade of Grass, you know, by
I've
John.
never read that. Is it good?
Oh, it's a great novel.
Okay.
And Earth Abides, you know,
I read that. Yeah,
that was one of the early ones I read.
And then Alas Babylon.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then there were all the end of the world movies I grew up with. So it's like, you know, watching The Twilight Zone, which also had its fair share of end of the world stuff, you know.
That and Outer Limits were brilliant.
I made sure I had 2 pairs of glasses just in case. Right? I didn't want to be Burgess Meredith with all those books ready to read. And
no, I knew what you're talking about too. I have 3.
There you go. So, you know, so you take certain precautions because of, you know, this fucked up shit we read and watched when we were kids. And it's like, oh. I have to say, in parting though, I am really disappointed that with all the end of the world books and movies and TV shows I watched, that when the pandemic actually hit, we all discovered how completely useless our government was in coping with it. And it's part of what, you know, had my wife and I hunkering down, like, okay, other people are being stupid, we're not going to be stupid. And yet we still caught it. What can you do? So
yeah.
Hey, well, Dan, this has been fun. If you ever want to do it again, just say the word. So
yeah, awesome, Steve. Yeah, thank you very much for doing this. And like I said, you're a huge inspiration, you know, in my art career. So I really appreciate it.
My great pleasure.